I'm Natalie Chase, 35 years old, standing in the executive boardroom of a company that once told me I wasn't leadership material. 6 years ago, I watched them give my promotion to a nervous intern with the right bloodline, their nephew. Today, I'm the CEO of the company that acquired them. The deal is signed. Their legacy now answers to mine. Before I tell you how I got here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever been quietly building something they thought you'd never own. Because the moment they dismissed me was the moment I started writing their ending. I had been working at Marlowe Finch for 8 years when the corner office across from mine finally opened up. It wasn't a surprise. The VP of strategy was retiring early, some quiet health thing no one talked about directly, but everyone tiptoed around. For months, there were murmurs of transition plans, discreet one-on-ones, calendar blocks labeled internal restructure. I wasn't just hopeful, I was prepared. My department had grown under my leadership. We'd exceeded projections for 11 consecutive quarters, and I'd mentored half the current mid-level management team. People came to me for direction even when they didn't have to. The team ran through me. I updated my resume out of formality, built a presentation outlining my vision for the division, and rehearsed answers to questions I already knew the answers to. I didn't expect a coronation, but I expected a conversation. The day the decision was announced, I didn't hear it from the partners. I heard it from Shannon in HR. She dropped the news in passing, like it was something I should already know, that Gavin will be stepping in temporarily as VP. You probably saw the calendar invite. Gavin, the founder's nephew. He had joined 2 years earlier, straight out of business school, and spent most of that time rotating through departments without ever staying long enough to learn one. He shadowed meetings, asked the kind of questions that suggested he hadn't read the brief, and showed up to town halls in expensive hoodies that made the CFO visibly twitch. But Gavin had a last name that matched the sign on the front of the building, and I had a track record that apparently wasn't enough. There was no formal rejection. No, thank you for applying. Just silence. A vacuum where recognition should have been. A promotion that was never posted. A decision that was never explained. In the days that followed, I became a ghost in my own office. People didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. My inbox dried up. Projects I'd led were suddenly reassigned. Meetings I used to run were streamlined without me. I wasn't fired, that would have been too obvious. I was being erased. One morning, I walked past the glass conference room where Gavin was holding court. He was laughing too loudly, holding a tablet upside down, and getting applauded for a half-baked idea I had floated 6 months earlier and had been told was too ambitious. I stood there for a moment, unseen, watching them nod and lean in and pretend. That was when I knew. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at a table they'd already pushed me away from. I was going to build my own table, one they couldn't sit at unless I invited them. And I wasn't going to say a word until the day I owned the room they'd once locked me out of. The thing about being quietly erased is that no one ever admits it's happening. There are no memos, no demotions, no explicit insults. It's subtler than that. You start noticing your name missing from calendar invites you used to create. Projects you initiated now have other leads. The interns stop asking you questions because someone told them to loop in Gavin. You become a fixture, still there, still competent, but slowly receding into the background like the office plant no one waters because it hasn't died yet. After Gavin's appointment, I returned to my desk with a forced smile and carefully neutral eyes. I told myself I'd act with dignity, that I'd make them regret it quietly, by outperforming and outlasting. But what I hadn't accounted for was the slow rot of being professionally ignored. The kind that chips away at your confidence, not with blows, but with silence. My days became shorter not because I left early, but because I wasn't needed. I sat through meetings where my ideas were paraphrased by someone else, and then celebrated. I received polite nods from people who used to engage me fiercely. There were whispers I wasn't included in. Slack threads I'd been removed from. Every day, a little more of me disappeared. I tried to stay visible. I offered to mentor junior staff. I sent follow-ups. I showed up early. But the truth was, the more I tried to be indispensable, the more they acted like I already wasn't. And that did something to me. I began doubting things I'd never questioned. Whether my numbers had really been as strong as I remembered. Whether the praise I'd received over the years had just been courtesy. Whether my value had always been overstated. Because when the world stops reflecting you back, you start wondering if you were ever really there. One day I stood in the kitchen making coffee when 2 junior analysts came in behind me, talking about how hard it must be to get passed over like that. I didn't turn around. I just stirred the sugar slowly and waited for them to leave. One of them realized I was there halfway through his sentence. The awkward silence that followed lasted years in my memory. I started eating lunch outside. I told people I had heads-down work so I could avoid the conference room. I became someone who smiled too much in hallways, who never corrected credit misattributed to others, who said great job to people who hadn't earned it just to keep the air light. They didn't fire me, they didn't have to. They just stopped feeding my career until it began to starve. But the thing about being invisible is, no one notices when you leave. So I started planning my exit. Not the dramatic kind. Not the speech or the slammed door. Just a quiet closing of tabs, a syncing of files, a backup of my personal drive. I watched them throw all their weight behind a name. But I knew something they didn't. My value didn't vanish just because they stopped seeing it. And when I finally walked out of that building, they didn't know it yet, but I was already halfway toward building something they'd one day have to answer to. I didn't storm out. There was no slammed door, no final confrontation, no scorched earth speech delivered in front of an audience of startled executives. That's the fantasy version people want to hear. The real story was quieter, more personal, more painful. It was just me, alone at my desk at 7:43 p.m. on a Wednesday, clicking export on a folder marked personal, zipping it and emailing it to myself with the subject line, backup. I stared at the screen for a few seconds after sending it, like I needed the extra moment to accept that I'd actually done it. I walked around the office one last time, not because I had to, but because I needed to feel what it was like to be in that space before I disappeared from it. The lights were dimmed to motion sensor levels. Desks sat lifeless, still cluttered with half-empty water bottles and mouse pads printed with outdated logos from corporate retreats. It smelled like toner and fatigue. I didn't even take the branded coffee mug I'd used every day for 8 years. Leaving it there felt symbolic, like shedding a skin. I didn't have a job lined up. No secret offer. No investors waiting in the wings. All I had was a resume that suddenly felt like a stranger and a notebook full of ideas that might never go anywhere. But I knew this much. I couldn't sit at a desk one more day pretending I was okay with being erased. My hands were shaking when I typed my resignation email. I had written and deleted it 5 times over the past 2 weeks. Each time, I'd tried to sound diplomatic, grateful, mature. But now I was too tired for performance. I typed, "I'm resigning effective immediately. I'll be available for 1 week to ensure smooth handoff." No emotion, no explanation, just a fact. Like removing a splinter that had been buried too deep for too long. I hit send and watched the email vanish into the ether of company servers that I would soon be locked out of. And then, I stood. That moment, the standing up hit me harder than I expected. My legs felt weak, like they weren't used to carrying the full weight of me anymore. I had let that chair become a container. I had mistaken structure for stability. And I was finally reclaiming both. The elevator ride down was silent, 12 floors and not a single stop. I watched my reflection in the mirrored doors. I looked older. Not tired, seasoned, like someone who'd survived something invisible. I stepped out into the cold air and immediately realized I didn't know where to go. My apartment was too small, too quiet. And I couldn't bear the thought of ending that chapter by just collapsing into bed. So I walked, no destination, just blocks of movement. Somewhere between 27th and Lexington, I ducked into a diner I hadn't been to in years. I ordered pancakes and coffee, even though it was past 9 p.m. The waitress didn't ask questions. She just poured the coffee and gave me the kind of nod that said she'd seen women like me before, newly unemployed, overdressed for the booth they were sitting in, looking like they'd just been peeled out of a version of themselves they weren't ready to meet yet. I opened my notebook, the one I carried in my tote, filled with messy outlines, product ideas, scribbled phrases like decision fatigue and data transparency, notes from conferences, headlines, problems that bothered me. And then a single question written in bold from months ago. What if I built something that couldn't be taken from me? That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. I felt empty, but in a clean slate way, like a fresh field after the harvest. No paycheck, no business plan, no title. Just me. But for the first time in years, that actually felt like enough to start. I pitched Lantern 37 times before anyone said yes. The first 10 rejections didn't sting. They felt procedural, like brushing off dust. I was new to this side of the table, the side where you sell the idea, not execute someone else's. I'd been the implementer for so long, I forgot what it meant to stand in front of people and say, "This is mine, I built this." But the next 10 rejections, they got personal. They were polite but condescending. Interesting concept, but we're not seeing scale. It's solid, but maybe not defensible. You should think about joining a bigger team, you'd be an asset. They weren't investing in my product, but they were happy to suggest I attach myself to someone else's. Back into the support role, back into the shadows. By rejection 21, I stopped rehearsing. By 30, I stopped sleeping properly. By 35, I started questioning whether I'd built a ghost, something only I could see, only I believed in, and then came number 38. The meeting was scheduled through someone I'd met at an event 6 months earlier, a woman I barely remembered, who'd asked for a coffee and then disappeared. Apparently, she'd sent my deck to her boss without telling me. That boss was Iris Lynn, an independent investor who had exited 2 analytics startups and wasn't on any of the top 10 women VCs lists, but everyone who'd worked with her spoke about her like she could see around corners. I was already tired when I joined the Zoom call. I almost canceled. I thought, what's the point? She'll smile, nod, pass. But Iris didn't smile. She listened. Closely. For 18 straight minutes. She didn't interrupt. She didn't check her phone. She didn't try to finish my sentences for me. She just watched. At one point, I thought my internet had frozen. That's how still she was. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "You built this out of pain. That's why it works." I stared at the screen, unsure if that was a compliment. Then she added, "How much are you raising, and what would it take to get this into 3 pilot agencies in 60 days? I gave her a number. A conservative one. She shook her head. "That's survival. I want to fund momentum." By the end of the call, she'd committed to leading my pre-seed round. Not contingent, not conditional, real money, real belief. The term sheet arrived that evening. No power games, no hidden clauses. She even let me choose the lawyer. When I told her I hadn't brought on a CTO yet, she said, "You'll know when it's the right one. Don't rush just to look complete." I stared at that document for a long time before signing. Not because I was unsure, but because it marked the moment my world shifted. Not when I left my job. Not when I built the prototype. Not even when someone used it. This was the moment someone who didn't owe me anything looked at what I had made and said, yes. Iris didn't flatter me. She didn't throw buzzwords around. She saw something precise and painful and useful in what I had built. And instead of asking me to explain why I deserved to be in the room, she asked how fast I could expand it. That night, I walked back to my apartment in the rain. No umbrella, no music, just the city noise and the weight of a new beginning settling into my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't trying to prove I was valuable. I was being trusted to show it, and I wasn't going to waste it. The first 6 months after Iris signed the term sheet felt like sprinting uphill through mud. Everyone talks about momentum like it's this glorious wind at your back. But real momentum in a startup? It's frantic, chaotic. 1,000 tabs open, 3 calls overlapping, 2 bugs crashing your demo build, and a meeting starting in 7 minutes. You can't breathe, so you just run faster. We were a team of 5-4, if you didn't count the intern, who ghosted after week 2. I was the CEO, the product manager, the de facto designer, and the person who stayed up until 2 a.m. reformatting decks for client pitches that might never happen. I wore so many hats, I stopped recognizing myself without one. We launched the MVP 4 weeks late, on a Monday morning that started with a power outage and ended with our first enterprise client calling it clunky but interesting. I cried in the stairwell that night, not because of the criticism, but because someone finally saw it. Even imperfect, even half-baked, they saw something. But then came the returns, the bugs, the churn, the endless cycle of feedback that always ended in, "This isn't ready." And I started to feel it in my chest, in my sleep, in the dull ache behind my eyes that wouldn't go away. I stopped answering texts. I ate whatever was closest. I didn't see sunlight for days. And worst of all, I stopped believing the thing I had told every investor, that I could do this. I remember sitting at my desk one night, 3 browser windows open, 12 tabs each. My inbox had 187 unread emails. My product roadmap was covered in red marks from my newly hired CTO, a brilliant woman who had the tact of a sledgehammer and the accuracy of a sniper. She was right about everything, and I resented her for it. I resented myself more for not catching it first. That night, I typed my resignation, not to send, just to see what it felt like. The words stared back at me with a cruel softness. I'm no longer the right person to lead this. I deleted it, but not before reading it twice. I took 3 days off. My team called it strategic thinking time. Really, I slept. I sat in the park and watched people not building startups. I journaled. I wrote the phrase, "What if I'm not enough?" 26 times until the letters blurred. And then something strange happened. I got a call from an old coworker, someone who had gone quiet after I left Marlowe and Finch. He'd been following Lantern quietly, reading updates, watching our slow progress. "There's a contract," he said. "Mid-sized firm, frustrated with their data tools. They want something leaner. I pitched your name." It wasn't a huge deal, but it was enough. Enough to keep us afloat for another 2 months. Enough to make payroll without begging. Enough to remind me why I started this. I went to that first meeting with no slides, just a browser tab and a quiet certainty I hadn't felt in weeks. I showed them what we built. I told them what it could become. They signed within 48 hours. After that, things moved faster. Not easier, but faster. The CTO stopped looking at me like I was a liability. The dev team started pushing code without me begging. And one morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Gavin in months. It wasn't that the past didn't matter anymore, it just didn't own me now. Breakthroughs don't feel like movies. They don't come with swelling music or applause. They feel like walking through fog and realizing the ground underneath you isn't shaking anymore. We weren't a unicorn. We weren't even a horse. But we were running. And this time, I wasn't chasing anyone else's roadmap. I was building my own. And every step forward, it felt like a quiet rebellion against every room that ever made me doubt I belonged. The strange thing about momentum is that you rarely notice when it starts. There's no banner that says you've made it. No trumpet fanfare, just a few quiet wins stacking up until one day, your inbox shifts from you chasing clients to them chasing you. That shift happened gradually, like fog lifting. We launched a second pilot, then a third. Our first client referred us without being asked. One afternoon, I got an email from a woman whose name I didn't recognize. She had heard about Lantern through a Slack group for mid-size analytics teams. That moment hit me harder than our first investor. Word of mouth meant we were no longer just pitching ourselves. We were being spoken for. I still worked like I was about to get evicted. I still woke up before dawn, scanned our burn rate before I brushed my teeth, and rewrote onboarding flows until midnight. But something had changed. We weren't drowning anymore. We were swimming with direction. We hired 2 more engineers. Then a part-time ops manager who, within a week, found a billing glitch I hadn't noticed for months. I gave her a raise by day 12. Our Slack grew noisy in the best way: bug reports, roadmap suggestions, client praise, even memes. Real momentum isn't a straight line. It's messy, nonlinear, full of course corrections. But for the first time, it felt like we weren't duct taping the plane mid-flight. We were flying. And then the news broke. I was skimming headlines over burnt coffee when I saw it. Marlowe Finch cuts 12% of workforce amid restructuring. I clicked the article. Buried 3 paragraphs down, almost an afterthought, was a mention of departmental realignment. My old department. They were sunsetting the analytics division. No formal closure, just a quiet kill. I refreshed the page, refreshed again. Then I laughed. Not loud. Just a sharp breath through my nose that surprised even me. I didn't tell the team. Not right away. I didn't want to give the past any power. But that moment marked a shift inside me. I wasn't building to outrun them anymore. I was building because this thing, Lantern, deserved to exist. It deserved oxygen. We crossed $50,000 MRR in month 9. Not enough to get us on TechCrunch, but enough to breathe. I took my first full weekend off. No laptop, no Slack notifications, just me, a paperback, and silence that didn't ache. People started using my name in places I hadn't entered. A founder I admired referenced one of my LinkedIn posts during a panel. A VC who once ghosted me emailed asking if I'd mentor a portfolio CEO. I said no, politely, and closed the tab without a second thought. I wasn't trying to prove I belonged anymore. I knew I did. And the beauty of that realization was how steady it felt. Not euphoric, just right, like setting something down after carrying it too long. Then, one night, my new head of growth showed me a graph. It was a competitive analysis, our growth curve plotted next to others in the space. And there, at the bottom, trailing in red, was Marlowe Finch. Their market share had dipped below 10%. I stared at that red line, the one that used to be mine, the one they thought would disappear without them. And I realized something. They hadn't just underestimated me, they'd completely misread the market. And now, the market was listening to me. I was at an industry conference in Chicago when I saw it. The hotel ballroom was beige and over-air-conditioned, with white tablecloths that didn't quite reach the floor and centerpieces that screamed corporate budget. I'd flown in that morning, still buzzing from our latest integration deal, still tired from the red eye, still running on conference coffee and adrenaline. The panels were forgettable, the networking clumsy. But then came the vendor showcase, a sea of booths lined up like soldiers, logos screaming for attention, freebies scattered like bait. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just wandering the aisles, sipping a warm soda, pretending to be someone who didn't notice every pitch and partnership on every table. And then I saw it. A booth tucked toward the end, a folding table, 2 stools, and a pop-up banner with a name I hadn't said out loud in years. Marlowe Finch. Except it wasn't the name that hit me. It was the logo. It was smaller, off-center, like someone had cropped it poorly in Canva. The typeface looked compressed. The colors weren't quite right, a washed-out blue instead of the deep navy I remembered. The entire thing felt like a knockoff of itself, like someone had tried to recreate the brand from memory and gotten it slightly wrong. And standing behind the table was someone I didn't recognize. not one of the old guard. Young, unsure, looking down at a tablet instead of up at potential clients. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't say a word as I passed. I stopped a few feet away, pretending to check my phone, but really, I just stared. That logo, once the banner of a company that thought I was invisible, was now physically shrinking into irrelevance. I felt nothing and everything. Not joy. Not revenge. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted. That maybe I wasn't the outsider anymore. Later that day, someone approached me during a breakout session. She was a senior manager at a mid-size firm and wanted to discuss a possible integration. She had a warm smile, smart eyes, and a business card with our logo printed crisp and clean. She said, "I used to work at Marlowe Finch. It's not what it used to be." I nodded, said something polite, and moved on. But inside, I kept circling back to the moment in front of that booth. That was the first time I realized what winning really looked like. It wasn't a press release, it wasn't applause, it wasn't even the term sheet we signed 2 weeks later. It was a faded banner in a forgotten corner of a beige room, sitting in the shadow of a company that had once erased me, and now couldn't even afford good design. It was watching someone else try to explain the value I used to deliver and fail. It was hearing our competitors quote us. Watching former colleagues follow me quietly on LinkedIn, never liking, never commenting, just watching. The logo shrinking wasn't just visual, it was symbolic. It was a metaphor for everything they used to stand for, bloated, nepotistic, dismissive, compressing under the weight of their own blind spots. I left that conference with no swag and no photos, just a single thought replaying in my mind. They didn't just lose me. They lost the future I would have built for them. And now, I was building it for someone else. It started with a carefully worded email. Subject line, exploratory opportunity. From a firm I hadn't spoken to in years. A mid-level consultancy that once partnered with Marlowe and Finch, and had always played it safe. Loyal to legacy brands, allergic to risk. I almost archived it without reading. But something made me pause. A familiar name in the signature. One of the former partners from M&F, now strategic advisor at a boutique M&A firm. Interesting. The email didn't mention Lantern by name. It spoke in euphemisms. Emerging players in adjacent spaces. Potential for value alignment. Market recalibration. But I knew what it was. It was a feeler. A soft tap at the door. And I had a pretty good idea who was knocking. 2 weeks later, a formal offer came through channels. A merger proposal. Equal parts vague and ambitious. Pages of projections, synergy maps, and polite flattery. They wanted to combine resources, unite missions, amplify reach. But the message was clear. They were bleeding. We were growing. They wanted in. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and laughed out loud, not out of arrogance, but disbelief, because I remembered what it felt like to sit across from them and pitch an idea, only to be told it was a stretch. I remembered how they'd cut me out of meetings, how they'd made me feel like a seat at the table was a favor. I remembered the HR emails I never got answers to, the performance reviews that said exceeds expectations but never came with promotions. And now, they wanted to be on my cap table. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted time to feel the weight of it. This wasn't a revenge fantasy. It wasn't about rubbing success in anyone's face. It was bigger. It was about being in a position where I no longer needed the validation. I wasn't scrambling for an invitation anymore. I owned the venue. I called Iris the investor who believed in me when Lantern was nothing but wireframes and late-night scribbles. I told her about the offer. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no, she said, "How does it feel?" That question stayed with me for days. Because, truthfully, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Clear. Like the power dynamic had reversed and I hadn't even noticed it happening. I walked into meetings now and people took notes when I spoke. Not because I was loud, but because they didn't want to miss anything. When we finally sat down for the first official negotiation meeting, I didn't bring a lawyer. Not yet. I brought a slide deck, 15 pages. Clean, unbranded. I outlined our roadmap, our retention metrics, our churn recovery. I spoke in numbers. I didn't fill the silence. I let them feel it. The faces across from me were familiar. Older, wearier, a little grayer, but still trying to hold on to a narrative they no longer controlled. One of the execs, someone who once bypassed me in favor of Gavin, leaned forward and said, "You've built something remarkable. We'd be lucky to align." I just nodded, because the truth was, alignment was a luxury I could now afford to be selective about. I told them we weren't interested in a merger. We were interested in an acquisition. Full. On our terms. Their team would be absorbed. Redundant roles phased out. Legacy products sunset. I offered transition packages, generous ones. But there would be no dual leadership, no committee decisions, no co-CEOs. Lantern had the torch now. I gave them a week to consider. In that time, we didn't pause operations. We hired 2 more engineers. We launched a beta with a client they'd once pitched to, and lost. We moved forward like the offer didn't matter, because it didn't. When the answer came back, it was a yes. A quiet, slightly bruised, but undeniable yes. And just like that, the company that once refused to even say my name in boardrooms was about to operate under my leadership. Not because I chased them, but because they had nowhere else to go. The offer on the table wasn't just a deal, it was a mirror. And this time, they had to sit across from it and see who was really holding the pen. The morning of the merger wasn't loud. There were no camera flashes, no press conferences, no champagne flutes clinking in front of a step and repeat. It was a Monday. Cloudy, the kind of gray sky that made office buildings feel heavier, like the glass was holding its breath. I arrived early, not because I had anything to prove, but because I needed a moment alone. I walked into the building that used to be theirs, and took the elevator to the top floor, the one with the boardroom that had once been off-limits to me. The same one where they used to make decisions about my career without ever looking me in the eye. Now the name on the elevator panel read Lantern HQ. No more, and Finch. No more last names that didn't include mine. I had brought nothing with me. No notes, no laptop. No assistant trailing behind me. Just a leather folder with the signed documents, and a pen I like to use for major moments, the kind that feels too heavy for casual signatures. The boardroom was already arranged. Not by me, by their admin team, who was now our admin team. Polished glass table, 12 chairs. Branded water bottles with Lantern's logo already printed. Subtle. Clean. Final. They filed in slowly, a few at a time. Some looked sheepish, some looked stiff. A few tried for small talk, the kind that felt obligatory. How was your weekend? Hope traffic wasn't too bad? I smiled politely. I didn't answer. Not to be rude, but because I wanted the air to stay charged. I wanted them to sit in the discomfort of the new power dynamic. The last one in was Gavin. He looked different. A little thinner, still dressed like he wasn't sure if he was going to a meeting or a brunch in Brooklyn. He avoided my eyes and sat 2 chairs down from where I stood. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't need to. The firm's legal representative began reading through the terms, not for the first time, just for the formality. I watched them nod along. Every clause they once would have redlined, they now accepted with barely a glance. Every line item tilted in our favor: stock dilution, board restructuring, executive authority, slid through without objection. They were tired. They were out of leverage. And I had waited 6 years for this exact moment. When it came time for the signatures, I didn't rush. I flipped each page slowly, let the silence stretch. I signed in black ink, deliberate and calm. When I closed the folder, the room was still. "Effective immediately," the attorney said. "Lantern will assume all operational control. No applause. No handshakes. Just truth." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. It had been the same view for them for decades. For me, it looked different now. Not taller, just clearer. The same way a room changes when you finally turn on the light. Behind me, chairs scraped back. Papers shuffled. People stood awkwardly, unsure whether to say goodbye or congratulations. I didn't turn around. I let them leave one by one. I wanted the last sound they heard to be the quiet weight of consequence. After they were gone, I stayed. I sat in the chair at the head of the table, the one I had never been invited to occupy. It wasn't triumphant, it was sobering, because in that chair I could still hear the echoes, the meetings where I wasn't called on, the strategies they dismissed, the sentences I never finished. But now, I had the final word. I didn't need to speak it. My presence was enough. I opened my laptop. No welcome banner. No new Slack channels flooded with gifts. Just a spreadsheet. A roadmap. A timeline. Because we had work to do. Not to celebrate a takeover, but to justify the trust of everyone who bet on me when no one else would. The merger was done. The logos would be updated. The emails would be redirected. The press release would go out at noon. But here, in this room, it was already real. The chair was mine now. And I wouldn't waste a single minute in it. It had been 6 years since I last stood outside that door. Back then, it represented everything I thought I needed to be whole: the corner office, the title, the recognition. I remember how often I used to glance at it when I walked past, how I'd imagine what the light must feel like pouring through its floor-to-ceiling windows. It wasn't just an office. It was a statement. A crown. Proof that I had arrived. Now, the door was already open. The nameplate beside it had been replaced. Not with mine. I had asked for no title to be printed. Just Lantern's minimalist logo. Let the space speak louder than my name. I stepped inside alone. No assistant. No welcome party. No social media team waiting to document the moment. Just me. My heels clicking softly against polished hardwood as I walked to the center of the room. The light was just as I imagined. Golden, heavy, honest. It didn't flatter, it revealed. I could see the entire skyline from the west-facing wall, glass that curved gently around the building's edge. From here, the city looked like it bowed a little, not in submission, but in recognition. Like it knew what I had paid to get to this place. The desk was bare. I liked it that way. A single notebook. A closed laptop. No flowers. No cards. No sign of celebration. I didn't want confetti. I wanted clarity. And this room offered it in abundance. I sat in the chair, not the same one from 6 years ago, but a new one I had chosen. High-backed. Structured. Quietly commanding. I leaned back and let the moment settle into my spine. This office was once a symbol of everything I couldn't have. A door that had been closed not just to me, but to what I represented: ambition without connections, competence without pedigree, vision without a surname on the building. They made me believe I didn't belong in that chair, that I was only valuable in the supporting roles: the planner, the fixer, the safe pair of hands. But the truth is, I had never needed their chair. I needed my own table. And now the entire company sat around it. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was earned. The kind of silence that follows a storm, when the walls still remember the wind but stand tall anyway. I could still hear the ghosts of old meetings, of passive-aggressive compliments and ignored suggestions. I could still picture Gavin, slouched across from the glass, trying to command a room he never really understood. And now? Now they were gone. Not just from the building, from the narrative. This space wasn't about them anymore. It was about what came next. I opened the laptop and pulled up a blank page. There was so much to do, departments to integrate, teams to reassure, roadmaps to realign. But I gave myself a few more minutes in the quiet, just to breathe, to feel the gravity of what had changed, not just externally, but in me. I didn't crave the approval anymore. I didn't ache to be seen. I had built something without them. And now that I was back in this room, it didn't feel like I had finally arrived. It felt like I was starting over on my own terms. The corner office wasn't the prize. It was the starting block. A second Genesis. I stood up, walked to the window again, and watched the streets below. People rushing to meetings, grabbing coffee, chasing deadlines. I used to be one of them. Quietly grinding, quietly fading, quietly hoping to be noticed. Now, I was the one they watched. Not for the attention, but for the direction. And I intended to make every square inch of this space count, because the view from the top isn't about height. It's about perspective. And mine had never been clearer. There's a pane of glass outside my office that spans nearly the whole floor. It reflects everything. The city, the traffic, the sky when it's blue, and even more vividly when it's angry. But the most honest thing it reflects is me. Every morning I walk past it and I see her. The woman in the reflection. She's not the same person who used to sit hunched in her cubicle rehearsing how to ask for a promotion without sounding pushy. She's not the one who swallowed disappointment with a corporate smile or stayed up past midnight fixing a deck just for someone else to present. That woman, the one who second-guessed every move, who tried to shrink herself into acceptability, she's gone. I didn't kill her. I outgrew her. Now I stand a little straighter. My clothes fit differently, not just tailored, but chosen. My voice lands differently in rooms. I don't raise it. I don't need to. People listen. Not out of fear, out of awareness, out of respect. And sometimes, though no one says it out loud, out of discomfort. Because I represent something inconvenient. A reminder of what they didn't see coming. They say success is the best revenge. I don't agree. Success is just the beginning. Power is the real twist. And I don't mean power over people. I mean power over my own narrative. When I walk through the lobby now, people glance up from their screens. I'm not anonymous anymore. Assistants stand straighter. Interns lower their voices. Not because I ask them to, but because they sense what it means when someone walks into a space like they built it. I don't perform leadership. I inhabit it. I hear whispers sometimes. From those who remember where I came from. Who remember the early days of Lantern when I was still stumbling through code reviews and pitching VCs from cafes because we couldn't afford an office. I hear the disbelief in their voices. How did she do it? And I never say a word. Because the answer isn't in a single line of code, or a deck, or a hire. It's in the accumulation of being overlooked. It's in the compound interest of being underestimated. It's in every room I sat through quietly. Every slight I smiled past. Every no that turned into fuel. I didn't explode. I evolved. There's a boardroom on the 27th floor that used to belong to the firm that once erased me. We kept the floor plan when we acquired them. That boardroom is mine now. My team meets there quarterly. And on the wall hangs a photo of Lantern's first product launch, 4 of us in folding chairs, grinning in the dark, the projector barely working. We keep it there to remind ourselves where we came from. Sometimes I catch visitors looking at that photo, then looking at me, trying to connect the dots between then and now. They never ask. But I can see it in their eyes, the unspoken awe, the subtle recalibration. It took years for people to realize I wasn't just lucky, that I was intentional, that I was always building something, even in silence. I don't correct people when they misremember the timeline, when they assume I had help, when they suggest it must have been timing. Let them think what they want. The real ones know, and the reflection in the glass knows. Because she was there when it was hard. She was there when I doubted everything. She was there when I almost went back. when I almost apologized for wanting more. And now she's still here, watching. Steady. Whole. The woman in the glass wall doesn't need to be introduced anymore. She is the reason the room shifts when I enter. She is the reason the silence doesn't scare me. She is the proof that they never saw it coming. But now? They never forget who they're looking at.